Our little Saturday afternoon live feed. Kind of let me turn this off. Bear with me. This was the hidden problem of some of my bad audio a week or so ago. Sort of keeping in line with some of the topics of individuals that are failing within our business or others, that sort of stuff. I went back and actually found some information that I wanted to share. I want to share with you guys. Could be valuable, could be not. I don't know. Some of this stuff actually isn't my own. I want to give credit where credit's due. Some of this data comes from the Tum School of Management from Hugo Kerr. He's got some information that's out there. There's a video that's if you type in Hugo Kerr motivation or something like that, you'll find some of his content, some of his videos. Really interesting stuff, and I want to give kind of a synopsis on that because a lot of it leads to some of the stuff that we've been talking about, which is, as we talked yesterday, there's individuals that are at a really good company, being paid really well, but are looking to maybe change, right? As we talked about in trucking, there's a whole lot of factors that individuals look at, but if we narrowed it down just to two, it's sort of that balance between pay and home time, right? Those are sort of the two most basic factors that a lot of individuals look at. And so keeping in line with that, there are a lot of individuals that are looking to make that transition. I know because overnight, I had, 7 or 8 emails, plus a few other comments of individuals asking for kind of input or advice or follow-up relative to this topic of should I or shouldn't I? And it's, it got me to thinking about when people should or when they shouldn't. Ultimately, I think Hugo Kerr sort of hits the nail on the head. And I want to talk a little bit about the research that they provided. They sort of break it down into 3 main topics, right, of people that are successful and happy. And he sort of breaks it down into topic 1 is the head, 2 is the heart, and 3 is the hand. Now, I'll kind of steal or borrow some of his data. In his example, he talks about when you ask someone about their head, people tend to think about its purposes for rational thinking, problem solving, reasoning, things of that nature, right? When we say the word heart to someone, we think about emotions or feelings, things of that nature, right? Intuition. The challenge is when those two things, the head and the heart, overlap, that area in the middle where they overlap is where we have a lot of the problems, right? And he goes on and he talks about that area is where conflict, if you ask people, hey, when you take the head and you take the heart, what is this middle area? And people tend to say, man, that's an area of conflict because when my heart and my head aren't maybe in line, that gives conflict. Some people feel like, man, when you bring those two things together, I've got a really tough decision. And a lot of times, whether to leave a company or to start your own business, your heart or your head might be telling you 2 different things. And where they overlap is where the rubber meets the road, right? Pun intended, I guess, for trucking. He goes on to describe, while that may be what people think of, in reality, the head really represents the goals and the values, right? Is really kind of what sort of thoughts run around in our head, right? The goals and values that we want. What's important, right, to us. When you get into the heart, it's sort of those unconscious motivations, right? That's sort of what that heart represents. Said another way, what is it that we like or what is it that we love, right? So you sort of have those 2 different things, goals and values, and then you have this, what do we love and what do we like to do? And if you're going to be starting a business, we've all heard those analogies of, man, make sure you're going to be starting a business that you do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Well, I'm here to tell you there's a lot of BS in that, right? There is. You can love what you're doing. There's still days that you're going to have a lot of conflict and a lot of difficulties. When you have that conflict, Hugo goes on to say, when you have that conflict in those 2 areas, again, that's sort of where that rubber meets the road. And he sort of highlights it into three different examples. And he said, look, when you have that conflict, that's where we have stress in our life. That's where we have burnout, right? I think we've all probably experienced some of these things. Generally speaking, that's when the body, right, our body and mind are just we're not in a place of well-being, I think is how he put it. When we experience those things, we have difficulty achieving our goals. Well, if your goal is I want to start a trucking business or I'm going to get my own authority, and you're not, in your head and your heart aren't in the right spot, that leads to, as I oftentimes say, things are going to be problematic, right? They're going to be problematic. When reaching a goal is not supported by your heart, right? In our mind, we say, look, I want to make more money. I want to leave this company and I want to go start my own. Why? Well, because I want to make more money, or I want more home time, or I want both. If those goals aren't supported by your heart, he sort of says, look, the research states. Sorry, I just had a call come in. Let me send this person a quick message. What was I saying? I think if common sense would dictate that if your heart isn't supporting kind of those things in your head, those goals, those ambitions, it's not going to lead to a place of happiness, right? You're going to be just as frustrated. You might be making more money, but the fact is that you've got to run harder or do different things that you're just not genuinely sort of enjoying or passionate about is going to be really problematic, right? And where he ultimately gets to is when you kind of deal with those things that can become problematic, that's where willpower has to come in and play a really big role. And he sort of mentions that people say they need willpower when they're having to forced to do something they don't like, right? If I've got to take this run and it's on a holiday, I don't want to do it. I've got to, but I need the money, right? I'm gonna have the willpower. If I'm so freaking overweight that I can't, I've got to have the willpower not to eat, right? That's on you. Doing your job really well, right? Paying attention to the details oftentimes requires a lot of willpower. And that's going to be the case when people struggle, right? When there's a struggle that's involved, it's a situation where willpower is required. You typically don't need to to use willpower for things that you like, right? If my choices are to go do yard work or to, go play golf, I typically don't need willpower to make that decision, right? I mean, I think we all would agree with that. But if that's true, if that's true, that one I think, and that also means that we do need willpower to motivate us for things that maybe we don't like to do, right? Driving, this, that, focusing on the details of the job, being honest, right, is one of those things that's a big deal for me. And so Hugo kind of talks about the two types of willpower you're going to need. He talks about willpower for your head, as well as willpower for your heart. And he kind of likens them to, type 1 and type 2. Type 2 is that willpower in your heart that's going to suppress temptations. Again, I'm overweight and I'm going to suppress the temptation to eat. He uses the example of cheating on your spouse, playing golf versus doing yard work, right? So that sort of transitions to me into some of this topic of where we see a lot of individuals fail within our industry, where they suck, because we all suck at certain things. But I think ultimately you have to be in a situation where you genuinely want to start a business and do something different. I think if we look at individuals that have failed time and time again within our business or other businesses, there's a recurring theme, and a lot of it probably has to do with maybe their goals aren't set correctly. Maybe they don't have the experience that's needed. Maybe they're not able to be honest with themselves or their peers or their coworkers or their business partners about their abilities. And that's where Hugo gets into the third part, right? You got the head, you have the heart, and he uses ability as a hand, right? And he sort of talks about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And for those like intrinsic, right? Intrinsic is something that just belongs naturally, right? It's not, you don't have to really go out and manufacture some motivation, right? It's just there naturally. Extrinsic, different, right? That's sort of the one that's in the head, and you've got to. It's not something that's norm, right? It's not part of the. It's not something that's essentially natural for someone or something, right? Yeah, Greg, good example. Unrealistic expectations, right? Your job, your pay, things that are extrinsic, could be a job or your pay, going to college, achieving a degree, that sort of stuff. I had a little debate. I posted something on Instagram yesterday. I was in McDonald's. I went to McDonald's yesterday, and instead of having the cash registers, they only have one now, and they have the little kiosk where you press the buttons, you order yourself. And I posted something. I was like, I'm surprised that those protesting for $15 an hour didn't see this coming, right? Which sparked a little conversation, as as I would expect, or anybody would expect, for those that sort of had that stance of, shame on companies for not paying employees a livable wage, right? And sort of had that dialogue. And I get the sensitivity to that, right? I really do. I just have the stance, and I've had this stance because it was pounded in my head growing up. It's not because I've had other businesses that I take this position. I had the same position growing up. And that position is, I should expect that nothing is going to be given to me. My mom and my dad grew up when they were young, incredibly poor. And they worked their butts off to achieve what they have. And so I don't believe it's any company's responsibility to pay me any wage. I believe that it's my responsibility to create the value within myself that's going to earn a livable wage. If that company, and the example I think I'd kind of mentioned was, look, I don't think any company nor any consumer or shareholder should expect that you're going to pay someone $35,000 is $15 an hour, right? I don't think that anybody should expect that, making a $1 hamburger, that individual probably shouldn't be paid $35,000, right? A 15-year-old with no business experience, with no cooking experience, can perform that job exceptionally well. So I just don't believe that it's the company's responsibility. I think it's our individual responsibilities to create the value. If that means being really, really good at a job, getting an education, it's up to us. Now, do I understand that bad things can happen in life that takes our life down a different direction? Of course, right? Of course it can. And so that's kind of a whole nother argument or debate, right? But I just find it very different, and I find it really interesting how people want to blame others. I see that within our own company. We have people that absolutely should know what they should be doing relative to the truck, and they don't. And that is frustrating to me because the amount of content that is available online. I mean, back in the old days, right? For those that are in my age bracket, when we ask our mom or dad something, what was the dreaded words we got? Walk over there and check it out on the encyclopedia, right? We had to look it up. Now, in 15 seconds, we can talk into our phone and we have the answer. And so there's no excuse to not be someone that performs at a high level at your job. If you're new to an industry, and we'll use trucking as an example, I get that most trucking companies, are there to just help you pass the test, right? You should know that too, right? You should know that too, which is why it's probably not a good idea to pay, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for a company that's just going to help you pass the test, right? If you're going to pay that money, you should walk out of that course having a really intimate, detailed knowledge of everything that goes on in this industry, And when you don't, and you know that there are things that you don't know, I think what happens so often, and I see it, we all see it, people jump on the internet, they jump on Facebook or whatever it may be, and they go to some of these forums. And this is the problem that I have as well, which is someone is trying to get an honest, they have a real issue, they're trying to get an honest answer from people in our industry that should know and that can help. The problem is this industry is full of individuals that don't know what the real answer is, but they believe it is. They answer this individual's question, and that poor soul is left to decipher 100, 200, 300 comments as to what's real or what's not. And that's frustrating. Malcolm Gladwell, he's had a book out. I don't know when it came out. It's probably been 8 or 10 years ago. It's called Outliers. If you haven't heard about it, it's a really good one. I don't know if it's on audiobook or not. If it is, download it. And there's a lot of interesting insight relative to why people are successful. He uses the example of Bill Gates. He uses the example of professional athletes. Kind of goes across the board, and he sort of says these are the commonalities of why these individuals are successful. One of the underlying principles in his book, and you may have heard about this, is that it takes about 10,000 hours of someone practicing something to be successful, right? So if you want to be absolutely an expert within your field of truck driving, it takes about 10,000 hours. If you want to be an expert at whatever, being a singer or in a band or an athlete, whatever, 10,000 hours of practice. So what's interesting is Princeton has came out, I think around 2015 or so, with a study that sort of refutes the fact that it takes 10,000 hours. And so they sort of said, look, practice is really important. But they said, look, practice makes a really big deal in sports 26% of the time. In music, there's a 21% difference in those who have 10,000 hours of experience versus not. Sports is 18%. Games is 26%. Education, 4%. Only 4%. Professions, 1% difference. 1% difference. So if you think about that, in a professional environment, if you have someone that spends 10,000 hours versus someone that has 1,000 hours of experience, but there's only a 1% difference, what does that sort of lend itself to? Well, that lends itself to the argument that you can do something for a long period of time. I don't know what video, there's a few videos I've said this before. You can do something for a long period of time and still suck at it, right? You can be new to an industry and still suck at it. And the reciprocal is true as well, right? You can have a couple thousand hours and be really proficient at something. That's why it's so hard to answer these questions when people say, I'm a company driver, should I make that jump to go be an owner-operator or that sort of thing? And it's really tough to answer. Which part of that sliding scale do you fit on, right? Are you highly exceptional at 1,000 hours, or do you suck after having 10,000 hours? Can't answer that, right? Only you can. And that's where it kind of gets to. I did a video where I think it was called Risk It All or something, where I talked about competence versus confidence versus competence. And so, yeah, exactly, Chris, right? There's a lot of us in that camp, right? We've been doing something for a long time, we suck at it, right? So, just because we might be good is such a relative term, but I see drivers often where they are wasting people's time within our company because they don't have willpower, because they don't take the time to really improve their knowledge relative to this industry. They could spend time looking up information, digesting it, reading information, learning whether it's about fuel economy, how the truck operates, like you name it, right? And across the board, they could be spending time to better themselves, and they don't. They spend time doing other BS, right? And that's frustrating, right? It's frustrating. But then they want to waste people's time for trivial things that they could have answered themselves. And as my parents were right, typically when I look something up or I answer it myself, that information tends to stick with me, right? And then there's that piece of the puzzle of, it's one thing to go find the answer, and it's another thing to replicate that function, right? To sort of remember that, right? I had to learn in college, and a gallon of water weighs 8.34 pounds, right? I had no clue back then how much a gallon of diesel weighed because it didn't matter to me. What was important at the time for what we were doing was a gallon of water. That sticks in my mind, right? Gallon of diesel, I can't tell you the exact numerical value. I can tell you it's roughly 7 pounds per gallon, right? So again, reinforce that stuff instead of just wasting other people's time, right? And typically those other people's time that they're wasting, they don't have time. Their time can't be wasted. They're really busy doing other stuff. And that's really frustrating. So why do we suck? Why do people oftentimes suck? It's because they're too freaking lazy. They're too freaking lazy and they want to blame other people, right? And I've been guilty of that throughout my life for a whole host of reasons, right? Look, I've been traveling quite a bit over the past couple of months, some for work, some for my father. And I still have, finally, there it is right there, that box. That's one of the last remaining boxes that I have to unpack. Now, if I showed you my office, there's still 5 or 6 that are in there, and my desk is an absolute disaster. I have a lot of excuses, but trust me, I've also had plenty of time to knock it out, right? So I'm just as guilty as anybody else. When you look at individuals, if you're that person that says, I want to leave trucking or I want to leave company A to go to company B, I think you really need to spend some time and go watch Hugo's video. I think it was like 17 minutes long or so. And really start kind of asking yourself hard questions relative to your heart, your head, and then your hand was the ability, right? Do you have the skills or the abilities? If you don't have the skills or the abilities to really understand business, being a lease operator or an owner operator is going to be really painful for you. It's going to be really expensive. It's going to increase the risk of your failure dramatically, right? But that's something that's a learned behavior. You can absolutely learn the basic functions of business to be successful. Having said that, you can also just learn the basics of being a driver and all the things that come with that. And if you fail at understanding the really important details of trucking, driving the truck, the act of driving the truck, what's the likelihood that you're going to be really successful at focusing on all the details relative to the business side? That's a question, that's an individual question that requires, essentially, you're the only person that can answer that. But don't let confidence outweigh your competence, right? I see that often, right? Walt Smith, nobody wants a driver that just jumps behind the wheel who doesn't care about their truck. They drive until it breaks because they don't check anything on the truck. Lie on their pre-trips. Well, I can't tell you the number of times I've seen it. Look, I'll tell you, it got so bad 2 years ago during flower season, right? And when we run flowers, it's really more of a, for an example for others watching this, it's more of a drop and hook situation, right? Driver comes in, drops off one trailer, picks up another trailer and leaves. The problem is when they drop off their trailer and they pick up the next trailer, if that trailer has a flat or marker lights that are out or some wiring issue or you name it, that's cost them time, it costs them money, it's problematic for us. Now we're going to be late. It's going to push off the deliveries, the next trip that they were supposed to make because we have a really tight window. It causes a tremendous ripple effect that's really negative for us. And it got to the point where I had to say this. I literally said this. I think it was a $50 penalty. I said, if you're not doing a post trip on the trailer, and when someone goes and there's an issue with a tire or there's an issue with a marker lights or some things that we're within control. We're going to find that driver that hauled that trailer last, $50. And that $50 is going to go directly into the pocket of the driver that did the pre-trip the next time and found it. And and we had it happen. I don't know, it probably happened 6 or 8, 10 times where money was going from this person to that person. All of a sudden, pre-trips and post-trips became the norm. All of a sudden, that problem wasn't a problem anymore. All of a sudden, we became more accurate on our time. Pre-trips were done. Trucks were in better running condition, or trailers were better operational condition. But it literally came down to the fact that these are professional drivers, and I had to fine them $50 for the first occurrence. The second occurrence, I think, was $75, and the third occurrence was going to be $100, and there wouldn't be a fourth, right? But these are grown-ass adults that we have to take. We have to go to that extreme, and that's just silly. And I don't want to be doing that. That's silly, right? But we've got drivers. I'm telling you right now, we have had examples. I can think of 3 off the top of my head over the past 3 or 4 years, where I get a phone call and I get pictures sent of steer tires that have metal coming through. I've said it many times before, on both of the RVs that I had, I was religious about checking those steer tires. Why? Because that was my life on the line. Oh, by the way, it impacted other people as well. There is no excuse not to be checking your steer tires regularly. There's just none. And I could go on and on and on, right? And I'm sure that there are just as many frustrations that drivers have back towards the office. We're not perfect. We're not going to be. But we're talking about things that should not be happening. And when you're not focusing on details of doing your job, you're probably not going to be more successful leaving a job that has sort of one function of just driving the truck and now has multiple functions of the business side of things. You've got to take that on. You've got to take on finding loads, booking loads, paperwork, taxes, the whole 9 yards. If you're not successful at doing kind of the basic function, why in the world would you think that you're going to be more successful when there's more on your plate? So, I don't know. You're the trucker, James Best. I started with Sierra England. Nearly drove me out of the business. 2.5 years later, I have my own truck and trailer, leased with a great company. Good for you. Randy Spears, sometimes that's the only way to get your point across. You have to take something from somebody. And Randy, I know you're right. It doesn't mean that it pisses me off any less. Because look, what I was about to say was, I know that I have a lot of appreciation for a lot of our drivers. We have drivers that suck at different areas. I don't feel that they should. I feel they should be better. They should have more willpower. They should have more diligence. They should take more pride in what they're doing. And I don't want to take money out of somebody's pocket, but I'll tell you what, it gets to the point that I want that problem to be solved far more than I care about taking money out of their pocket. That's when it gets that bad. And that sucks. It does. And, but the problem solved itself. It really did. Chris Reverend at James' excellent story, love marathon life feeds. Walt says, what drivers don't know is that pre-trips and post-trips for every delivery are now all part of of course they are, right? That hasn't changed. That's still common. No doubt, right? No doubt. Joe Harding says, #subtle. Oh, man, I'm not terribly subtle. No, Jack, we don't charge drivers for damages. Do I want to at times? Yes. Sure I do, right? Because, I would be willing to say, somebody asked me here a week or a month or so ago about what percentage of our accidents were preventables. And it was on a live feed, and I can't really think of one that we've had since we started the company that wasn't preventable. And that's what's so frustrating, right? I mean, whether it was the one where the lady drove the truck through the tree limb, doing tremendous damage, to other mistakes. I mean, every driver, every accident that I can think of was preventable. And some of these accidents have caused damage to property, not just our property, to others. Some of these preventables have turned other people's life upside down. That's where I feel like a lot of drivers, they don't have to deal with people calling them saying, look, this car that I had, here's an exact quote from a person. This car, I realized, was not a nice car. It's not a Mercedes, right? But you know what it is? It's my car. And that car has been totaled, right? And so they don't have to deal with phone calls from all hours of the night and text messages from people who are crying or upset or mad or whatever because somebody just didn't take a little bit extra time to take care of something. That's really frustrating. That's what I'm talking about, focusing on the little things, the details. I know mistakes are going to happen, but some of these mistakes are big deals that with just a little extra time, a little extra effort could have been preventable. That's why it's called a preventable. Good morning, Alice. Yeah, Josh, no, as you know, right, that Canal did set his brakes. That was me giving him a hard time. Jim says he missed the notification. Get me up to speed here. Man, it's kind of, I'm already a long ways into it, Jim. This is probably one just to go back and rewatch. But I think I want to go back to what I think Greg had mentioned earlier, which was unrealistic expectations. If you're probably not, it's probably going to be, the odds are stacked against you to go make $1 million a year if you're not really good at something, or if you're lacking in the expertise, whether that's education or whatever it may be, that's going to allow you to be really successful. The work ethic to want to be hyper-focused on the details. If that's not you, you're probably not going to be financially independent. You're probably not. I don't know that sucks to say. It's just, that's probably the case, right? Short of winning Powerball or something, or someone leaving you some money or inheritance, or some lawsuit or whatever, right? You're probably not going to be financially independent. Those that, if we just sort of take a glance around those that are, as Malcolm Gladwell says in his book, there are reasons that he's attached to why some of these individuals were highly successful, but they also are hyper-focused on doing things really, really well, right? So, can you make 100 grand as a company driver? Yeah, there's plenty, I'm not gonna say plenty, but there are certainly companies, Jack, that you can make 100 grand at, you bet. No, Jack, I will not. I will not pay drivers by the hour. Absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. Because when given the opportunity, many, I'm not saying all, right? But when given the opportunity, and look, we do guaranteed pay at certain times of the year. And it's so easy to see. I mean, I think drivers don't understand all the data that we see and all the things that we track, but it's so easy to see. And here's why. Because we will be taken advantage of by some at the first opportunity. I'm just telling you, right? Are there certain companies or types of jobs driving jobs where that would play well? Yeah, sure, I do. I think there are times when that's the case. But if you track it and you track someone's productivity, what they do, the miles that they run, those sorts of things, you'll see that when given the opportunity, some will take advantage and fleece the company. Data just came out. Who cited that data? I can't think of where I saw the data that was cited, but the ELD manufacturers obviously track a lot of data. They're turning this over, and I can't recall who it was that compiled this data, but they stated that since ELDs have gone into effect, drivers are now driving about an hour and a half more per day than they were without ELDs. Now think about that. For all those that argued that all this really egregious cheating was going on from the paper logs, and look, we all know that it happened. What's interesting is now drivers are actually driving an hour and a half more per day because of a whole host of reasons, right? Some of which is there are now guidelines, there are now boundaries and rules that they can't break, right? And so they are forced to be more efficient within that allotted time, right? So some interesting data. I can't recall who cited that. Keith, how are you? Dixie fellow, don't pay new drivers like slaves. Look, this has been problematic for us, and I see both sides of the equation. We pay anyone that comes in to haul flowers. Everyone is paid exactly the same. That's why I have a much lower tolerance level for some of the people that have lower experience. Look, if you're going to be paid the same as someone that's got 10 or 15 years of experience, I have high levels of expectations that you're going to be performing at a high level. Right? Otherwise, it's not fair to the guys that have a lot of experience. And so when those who have less experience aren't doing the little things well, that's why I am so quick to fire those individuals. Because if you're going to BS me or BS those that interview you and say that I'm all things, I'm great at this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, we will give you grace. We understand that you're not going to have maybe the skill set that someone that has, hopefully you don't have the skill set that those have been driving 10 or 15 years have. That means that driver has been driving 10 or 15 years isn't doing particularly well. But I understand there's going to be some growing pains with those that have less experience. It doesn't mean that my expectations are lowered because of that. It means that I actually have higher expectations that they're going to work their ass off, pay attention to the details, work really diligently on understanding everything from A to Z on being the best driver that they can, managing that equipment, understanding their trailer, their engine, you name it, right? I expect that. If I'm going to pay you just as much as the guy that's got 10 years experience, and I'll tell you this, the older drivers as well, they have the same level of expectations. And that's why when guys with younger or less amount of experience aren't performing well or slacking off, that's why the older drivers are quick to say that's BS, right? Fix it or get the hell out of here. And I'm thankful and I appreciate that. I think that's a healthy environment because there's a lot that goes on. And what we do is dangerous. Let's not kid ourselves, right? I was on the phone yesterday with an attorney who's a litigator in the transportation industry, and he said, and he said it several times and asked him this. Is that your kind of go-to phrase when you're litigating? And he said, yeah, it's one of his phrases because he continued to use the phrase that this is an 80,000 pound missile going down the road, right? And he's not far off from that, right? And so when there are drivers that have a CDL and I think that they now possess all the knowledge, right? It's frustrating. There are reasons why you hear drivers whining, and I say whining, I don't mean, that sounds disrespectful. There are reasons why we hear drivers complaining about parking because that's a real issue. There are reasons why we see more mature drivers in years of experience complaining about a lot of the other individuals because they just don't have that tenacity to want to learn. I think the biggest problem in our industry is how piss poor trainers are and how companies are allowed to have trainers that have not much experience be training these guys. Could you imagine if the FAA allowed the same level of training for a pilot as they do a truck driver? That would be bad, right? But yet, companies are allowed to have guys that can't even spell truck to train an individual. I mean, that's just so silly that we've got trainers that have just a couple months experience. You know what I'm saying? It's frustrating as hell. Honest conversation before agreeing to work together increases longevity. Sure. What do owner-operators really make after all expenses net? It's different for everyone. Dixie Fella says if new drivers choose a good company to begin with, what's their choice? Yeah, I'm not sure what you're asking either. Christopher Edwards says knowledge is provided, but only to those who need to know, right? I mean, that's what it seems like. Like I've seen it, and it's not just in trucking. I mean, I've seen it in technology sales as well. I mean, it doesn't matter. People act like information is only available to some select few when it's generally publicly available. It just takes freaking effort to go and dig it up. And there's some conversation you guys are pounding on steering wheel. Nobody wants a driver that jumps behind the wheel, doesn't care about their truck. Yeah, we talked about that, sure. Let me jump way down, I'm kind of behind. Little Viking Coach, welcome in. He says, I read the opposite. Drivers are driving less hours since ELD because they shut down early, so they're guaranteed a parking spot. No more pushing to the last second. Yeah, I would have agreed with you, absolutely. This was data that came from, golly, I cannot remember who cited this, but they're driving an hour and a half longer. So said that study, right? So said that study. With Flowers, QAL asks, with Flowers, do the drivers or computers route plan the deliveries? So we route it with the software, right? Shortest routing. And you have to understand that we're not delivering the same amount of product to every store. So it depends on how much product that store has sold, inventory turnover that we're going to send to them. So, some stores may get 10 racks, some may get 2. And so it all depends. So we use the software to load the trucks and do the routing. So basically we throw every flower that's going to be delivered for that particular 2-day window. And the computer says, look, this is what trailer it needs to go on, and this is the route that it needs to take, and that sort of thing. Having said that, and so that software works really well. Where that software fails poorly, or fails frequently, is because of the human interaction and how poorly we plan at times. And so routes range, ends of runs change, and in some cases multiple times, and that's frustrating. It's because we are constantly being reactive instead of someone actually being proactive and planning ahead. We're left at, when I say we, transportation is left to be in a reactive mode oftentimes. And I assure you the drivers are frustrated all the way to me being frustrated and everyone in between. Worley MGTOW says, I know nothing about driving, I just fake it until I make it. Yeah, trust me, there's a lot that do that. There really are. And it is scary. You think trucking is the highest paid blue collar job? No, not at all. I would think, so that's a good question. So like immediate word association, highest paying blue collar job, I would quickly, I'm gonna Google this. My immediate answer would be welders. Let's see. Highest paying blue collar jobs. Gas plant operator, landscape architect, transportation inspector. Let's see, 5 blue collar jobs that pay over 100K, because none of those that I just cited paid over 100K. So, all right, so top 5 off of statesman.com. Police officer, 131,000. Bartender, contractors, construction managers, farmers, ranchers, oil rig workers. There you go. If you want the top 20 here, I'll read them down. Number 20, production supervisors, surveyor, avionics technicians, electrical engineers, subway operators, petroleum pump operators, boiler makers, solar energy installation managers, cartographers, mechanics and supervisors, aerospace technicians, gas plant operator, landscape architecture, transportation inspector, power line installer, power plant operator, water vessel captain, powerhouse equipment installer, elevator installer, and number 1, a power distributor. Which is this is really a strange list because none of those pay averages over 100 grand. So that's what the internet told me really quickly. Poorly done search. I'll own that. Christopher Evers says, I cannot imagine myself as a trainer. I had to go get Under Armour socks that have the L&R on them. That's funny, man. I can remember when Kyle was a little bitty. I took the Sharpie out, right? L-R, and he didn't care. And to this day, he'll have like 2 rights on and 2 lefts on. That drives my OCD nuts. Walt Smith says, even though I'm not a driver, I researched the ELD law because I found it interesting thing to learn about. I wanted to know. QAL says when he was driving, the software said to go this way between 2 picks. It was 2 hours. I think what you're saying, it was 2 hours out of your way. I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, look, there's plenty of examples when the software performs poorly, that sort of stuff, right? Little Black Hand, couldn't agree with you more. The ELD is nothing more than just the tracking part of it. Now, I was guilty of this, right? I sort of, a year and a half ago, or a year ago, when I started kind of talking about some of this, I sort of just lumped, it all into the ELD component. But it really is the hours of service, right? It's not. If you want to be really specific, it's not the device, whether it's paper or electronic, that you're logging on. It's the hours of service that are really jacked up. I'm glad to see that the government is testing at a small level some other functions relative to hours of service. I'm glad to see that they have amended personal conveyance, so the guys can move to a truck stop under a load. That solves a lot of problems, a lot of very stressful situations for drivers as well as shippers and receivers. I'm glad that they're making some, what I would consider some common sense regulation in the industry. But I'll also be the first to say, and I've said it on many other videos, there's a lot more common sense that could go into the FMCSA regulations. There's so much ambiguity that it's just foolish. And I think generally speaking, most drivers and most carriers want to do what's right. But there's so much ambiguity. It's like, just, is it black or is it white? I don't want shades of gray. Just tell me, which way is it, right? John Hall, welcome, man. How are you? I know a lot of guys in the oil field from Oklahoma. Listen, I know so many friends, so many people that are, just really, really poor, right? They grew up in very rural Oklahoma. And when the oil industry is booming, those people are spending, $75,000 to $90,000 on pickups. They still live in a double wide. The truck costs more than the double wide, and then they buy boats and bass boats, and they do all this craziness. They go into crazy amount of debt, and whenever the oil industry tanks, they're right back to where they were. When they had such good opportunities for 4 or 5 years to make $150,000, stash a lot of cash and get themselves out of trouble, and they just can't, right? They just make really shitty decisions. We've all made shitty decisions, but they continually make really poor decisions that keeps them in just a really horrible financial place. Again, as I talked earlier in this video, And that just lends itself to a lot of unhealthiness. John Hall says, your operating knowledge base has to be huge, wear lots of hats, fight lots of fires. And that's really well said, John, and that's what I was talking about a bit earlier. You know, if you're poor, if you're just like average, this is where you got to be really honest with yourself. And a lot of people don't want to do that. They want to act like they're Superman, but that's where you got to be really honest with yourself. If you're not particularly, I mean, if you're not great at the act of driving the truck and managing your hours and route planning and trip planning and all that sort of stuff, you're not going to be better, right? You're not going to be better when you add a whole host of other responsibilities that come from being a lease operator or an owner operator onto your plate, right? You're not. Alex Express is great, he says. So good for him. But you understand where I'm coming from. So that's just where you have to be honest. It doesn't mean that you can't get there. It doesn't mean that you can't achieve that. It means you're going to have to work your ass off to do that. So go work your ass off. Stop wasting time watching me and other people on YouTube or the drama, and go focus on things that are going to be really valuable to your business, right? Paid parking is a big problem in some areas. It's going to get worse. I read something, I didn't read the article, I just saw the headline the other day where they said there was, at some truck stop somewhere, drivers were like staging a coup against the truck stop, something to do with paid parking. So I'm surprised that the number of spots that require pay for parking hasn't increased, because we're all stuck, right? Carriers, drivers, whatever, you're stuck. I'm surprised that they haven't increased it. Little Viking, do you reimburse drivers for paid parking? Do you expect them to arrive early enough to find a spot? In some cases we do, in most cases we don't. It just sort of depends on the situation, right? I mean, we're not up in the Northeast a whole boatload. Not that we don't go up there some. Like, for example, when Joe Harding, pisses me off, then I make sure that we try to send him to the Bronx for a week or two. No, I'm just kidding. But so we try to avoid some of that. But I mean, I do want the drivers kind of managing that piece of the business. In some cases, we do. When it's a bad situation, then we understand. But no, typically I don't, because I'll tell you, we've done it in the past. And what happens is this. And not that this is going to surprise anybody. When we started doing that a little bit, then all of a sudden, the text messages and phone calls flooding all hours of the night. I need this, I need that, I need this, I need that. When before it was never an issue, right? Now again, this is kind of pre-ELDs. I'm just, like I said earlier, when given the opportunity, people will take advantage whenever they can. That's why I refuse to pay hourly and that sort of stuff. And I'm telling you guys, you can say, God, man, he's an asshole or whatever, and sure I am, but you guys sit on this side of the steering wheel and you deal with, 50 different drivers, and some of which are really exceptional and some of which are just really horrible. You will feel the pain, and you will get so fed up and sick and tired of the nonsense phone calls and that sort of stuff. And the tough part about this is this. You don't want to discourage someone from calling and asking a stupid question, because at the end of the day, that's a good thing. That's an individual that's trying to learn and trying to improve. So you don't want to discourage that. What you want to see, though, is when they've been told the answer to the problem is 4, at some point, 2 or 3 times later, after asking the question and being told the answer, I expect them to know that, hey, the answer is 4, and I don't need to call somebody else at 2 in the morning to find out that, in fact, the answer is still 4, right? So, Michael, how are you, man? I'm glad you're listening. Driving, be safe, buddy. Randy Spears, paying for parking criminal. It's pretty tough, man, especially for what they charge you guys. I mean, a shower, right? $14, and I know a lot of you guys tip the shower attendants, right? So a lot of times you're paying $18 for a shower. That's rough. From a company standpoint, I know for a fact that this happens. I see it happen all the time. Guys don't want to pay $20 for a shower. I don't blame you. I don't want to pay $20 for a shower. So what do guys do? Well, they go and they get 50 bucks of diesel. Problem is, I hope, and sometimes I see it. My ask is that I hope our guys plan for that. Man, I want to shower. And so I'm going to try to fit that in where I can find the cheapest diesel. I know it seems so trivial to just buy 50 bucks of diesel. Yeah, we need diesel anyways. But when you're paying 15 or 20 cents or so more for those 50 gallons and you've got 20 or 30 trucks running and everybody's doing that, all of a sudden, it adds up. It's frustrating, man. And I said it here a while back. That's one of the advantages to the lease out model for a carrier is the driver needs to become responsible for all those things that I'll classify under the tab of waste, out of route, tolls, not paying attention, looking at Google Maps and thinking that you can take this route when in fact there is no route there. I mean, you just go on and on and on for all the decisions that are made. A lot of them cost the company or the carrier a lot of money, right? And the more trucks you have, the more that cost is going to be incurred. And so, and Jack, you're like one of the biggest. Oh, look, we do have a troll alert. Somebody, let's see, we'll ban him. All right, good. And so it's, Jack, you were like hardcore. Oh, owners are greedy and this and that. It's like, man, just spend a week answering the phone 24/7 and looking at the numbers and looking at the waste and the cost and the risk associated with it and how easily some of these expensive wastes could have been mitigated. And if it were your money, you would have a different appreciation. So it's not so much about the greed component it's about waste. I think that's the big differentiation that Howard, if he were online, he would tell you, having seen things for a couple of years now in the office, he has a very different perspective than he did when he was behind the wheel. He sees it all now. He sees the waste and the frustration, and it's significant and it's real. And I like to, I believe that the majority of our drivers are better than what we have in the industry. So if that's the case, I really understand when a lot of these other companies that have a lot more trucks than we have are doing things that seem what's the right word? Doing things that the driver would perceive as just BS or nonsense or cheap or that sort of thing. Man, I'm telling you, these costs add up a lot. John Hall, you know what? You're the second person in 2 days. Kristen actually told me last night. She said this. Kristen said, I hate to admit it. And trust me, I know that she's right when she says, I hate to admit it. She said, hate to admit it, but you're right. I wish more people would think like you, John. I really do. Hang on. Nobody wants to see this. I'll put picture there. I don't know what you think I'm right about, but I'll go with it because it's just rare that I'm right. Back in the day, I changed my own oil filters on off ramps and then rolled half a mile to the J to shower. Yeah. Kyle, he went. So here's sort of the deal with Kyle, right? Kyle's my son. So bought him a Tahoe. But the deal is look, you're responsible, and you're responsible for all the maintenance, oil changes, tires. That's on you. That sort of thing. And so here about a month or so ago, he said, he's like, Dad, I went to Jiffy Lube, right? And I told him, I was like, look, this is gonna be this opportunity for you to ask questions, think. Well, he didn't ask questions. He thought, well, Jiffy Lube, I need an oil change. That's where you go for an oil change. $110 later or whatever it was, something like that. It was $100 plus. He's like, I had no idea, Dad, that, it costs that much. And he's like, how much does it cost for a big truck and all that sort of stuff, right? And I was like, dude, you can do that yourself. You can go to Walmart, buy the oil, and for like $25, you can do it. There's a whole lot of other places you can go. Son, you just learned a really valuable lesson. You're sort of like paying for something to be done quickly. And if you are in a really big hurry, then maybe paying $100, or you can go to some of these other places and you'll pay somebody $25. Anyways, so those are good lessons to learn. Randy Spears says, the thing is we're paying for the showers anyway. These major fuel stops are charging more than the mom and pop. Therefore, look, and we all know some of the things that go on and the rates that you guys are charged. It's something in the environment is killing the common sense part of people's brain. Look, I'll say this only because I know my cousin, I hope, never watches this. One of, and this isn't my opinion. This is based on the awards that she won. She was literally sort of, based on all the awards, she's sort of, I don't know what, certainly top 1%. She's one of very few people that have won the number of awards that she won at the University of Oklahoma. One of the smartest people to go through that university, ever. And as smart as she is, she lacks so much common sense. Like, it is hard for me to believe. I mean, I just sit back at like family gatherings and I watch her, and it amazes me that someone could be that brilliant and that dumb all in the same little package. And I'm sure she looks at me and thinks, I can't believe someone can be that dumb in the same package. So, yeah, there is a lack of critical thinking. Michael, I couldn't agree with you more. Personal integrity, but here's the problem, Michael. It's not just from employees. And this is where I think the problem lies. It's not just from the employees up, it's from corporate down. And so in the middle, we just have this messed up load of freaking crap because nobody can be honest. That's one of the problems I have with PC. We have gone so far to the side of political correctness, and I understand that we want to be polite and kinder, and I called some guy the other day a racist piece of shit on he was in one of these trucking groups. And he said this, he's like, I'm deadheading from Denver to Texas. I'm not taking this cheap freight. I'll let Habib have it. Literally what he said. Like almost word for word, maybe word for word. And I said, you know what? It's always a good idea to take, a backhaul with you anytime you go into an area that's sort of known for having some cheaper rates, Denver being one of them part of the year. And I said, however, there's not really a need to be a racist piece of shit. Right? A little bit later, he responded with something to the effect of, oh, look, the internet tough guy is here. And I said, it has nothing to do with being a tough guy. This has everything to do with being just a decent human being and not a racist piece of crap. That's all this has to do with it. And what I was really proud to see was a whole lot of truck drivers jump in and sort of say, look, man, I'm sure that individual, Habib, if you will, I'm sure those individuals would love to make more money. Why don't you spend a few minutes and educate them? Tell them what they should be doing. Tell them they should carry a backhaul. Tell them not to take the cheap freight. There's a whole lot of ways we can be better as an industry. And he didn't, I think he sort of realized maybe he was kind of maybe out of line because he never came back and said anything, which was good. You don't often see that. Usually there's like this nonstop war of keyboard warriors, right? Anyways. Sir, your son, the Scotty Kilmer car maintenance channel. Man, I'll write it down. I haven't heard of that. Scotty, where'd it go? Where'd that comment go? Kilmer car maintenance. I'll do it. It's the chemtrail. I don't know what it is, Jack. I tend to think I've coached young men, really young guys, all the way up until when they're, kind of, 14, 15. I think there's a couple of things. I think kids are being spoiled way too much. I think kids are not allowed to stretch their imagination and test boundaries as much as maybe they could. Parents are really quick, or school teachers or whoever, adults are quick to slap them on the wrist and tell them, no, you can't do that. Okay, if we're gonna tell them no, they can't do that, why don't we use this as a learning tool for an adult or a kid and not just tell them no, tell them why. Why? Because when you stick that bean in your nose, right, you could choke. Or if you stick that bean in your nose, then we're gonna have to go to the hospital and they're gonna pull it out. And it's gonna cost a lot of money, right? And oh, by the way, we're supposed to go to Water World and we're gonna be late because you got a bean in your nose when I told you don't stick the bean in your nose, right? When we tell guys not to do something in trucking, and we're guilty of it, I guarantee you we're guilty of it, let's not just tell them no, let's use it as an educational opportunity. And then allow that individual to then question why we say no and why our answer is, and let's not get all pissed off. Again, I'm guilty. Let's try to use it as an opportunity to learn and we all get better, right? No, Randy, common sense isn't so common anymore. John also is funny, I know, but the 1 hour in a little dirt saved over $100. Yeah, for sure. Found a good car detailing channel called Dallas Paint Correction. Guy sounds like Ray Romano. Ray Romano's funny. Worley, price law on labor incorporation. It's price law on labor. What do you mean? Holly Willoughby, she's gone. Yeah, Michael, I agree, man. That's why I encourage Kyle. And man, there's been times I'm hard on that kid. I'm gonna tell you, I'm hard on it, on him. And I was hard on a lot of those other kids that I coach. And I'll tell you, those kids will still text me, and they're 17 years old now. These kids are traveling, playing at really high levels of baseball, and they'll call me or text me in the middle of the night, hey, coach, can I talk to you? Sure, you're right. And a lot of times what I find out and what they are learning too is it's these 6 inches between the ears that are most problematic, right? To use the example earlier in this video, right? They've got the hand, they've got the heart, and they've got the head, but sometimes the head gets in the way, right? And so that's the case for all of us. Let's see, this means that in a company of 10 employees, 3 of them do half the work, the remaining 50% of the work done, 7 other people. Look, let me give you guys an example. So way back when I started into my professional career, this was in well, I'll take you a few years ahead, but when cell service and cell towers really became prevalent in the 90s. Worked for AT&T, right? Huge company, Fortune 10 company, hundreds of thousands of employees. This was the most profitable business unit, right? So this is where a lot of effort, a lot of money was focused on building that particular business unit. We had engineers that were responsible for designing very complex networks. And what we found were there might be 100 engineers, but there were 3 that were exceptional at doing 2 things. 1, designing the network, talking to the techies, and 2, they were able to be brought in front of the customer and they could speak, I'll say eloquently, but really what I mean is they could talk at a low level, or at a high level, I guess is a better way to put it. They could talk at a high level so that the customer who is not an engineer could understand that. And those guys, everybody was trying to tap those 3 or 4 or 5 individuals, and it sucked for them because they were really valuable. They knew that they were good. They tried to do everything great, but those other 95 people just had it so easy, and it sucked. Is that any worse than us in lawn darts? Here's what's sad. I can remember when I was a kid, we had lawn darts. We'd go over to my buddy Shane's house. They'd stand in the backyard. We'd stand in the front darts, dark. We had like the porch lights on, so you could sort of see the lawn dart, like when it sort of got to the roof, the last 10 or 15 feet. Beyond that, you couldn't see the lawn dart, and we would chuck them over the house at each other. We thought that was the funniest thing ever. What goes straight up comes straight down. That's not true. There's a whole lot of, depending on how high you throw it, you got rotation there. You got a whole lot of, but I know where you're going with that. TJ, how are you, man? Long video, didn't really mean, I knew this would go maybe a touch longer than normal. I really want to try to keep these to 30, 45 minutes, and I fail epically at every time. If you're coming in late, go catch the first part of this, right? It really has everything to do with wanting to be successful in I don't care what industry it is. Obviously, I've kind of tailored this a little bit towards the trucking. Really need to do some hardcore self-assessment of whether or not you suck or not. The good news is if you suck, you can sort of fight your way out of that paper bag, but that requires some effort. If you're not willing to put the effort in, go find a different industry. And don't be mad when companies don't want you, right? That's right, huh, Duke? So even in an environment where, the driver shortage is what it is and that sort of thing, it's tough. It's tough. I mean, we're probably no different. We probably have 20% of that 80-20 world. We've got 20% that are really solid drivers that do a lot of things really, really well. And we sort of have that other 80%, everybody's kind of up and down on that spectrum. Obviously, what we want to see is, if you're in the bottom 20%, we want to see you working your way up. And that comes through communicating with other people within the company. If you have questions about operational equipment or gear or this or that or route planning, communicate. Look stuff up online and all that kind of jazz. There's a lot of stuff there. Oklahoma Dave, hey, wait a minute. That was way up at the top, sorry. Jack says he'd suck as an owner-op. Look, here's the thing, Jack. I would suck as an owner-op from the driving side. But I'm going to tell you what. I would spend time and money, and I would find some place where I would be the freaking best guy at backing a trailer, far faster than most people. I would be far better. I would just spend the time and the effort in being exceptional, because I would not want to go out there and be just slightly above average, right? I had a coach, boy, you talk about something that stung. I had a coach one time say this to me, and I appreciate this because this stuck with me for a long time. He said, hey man, I see what you do, right? You're setting records on the field, that records that have stood for a long time, and you're breaking records. And then, oh, by the way, the very next year, you break the record that you just set. Excuse me. Why aren't you putting as much effort into the classroom as you do on the field? And I sort of gave that jock answer. Well, what matters is right here, right in between the lines, right? Snap that headgear on. This is what matters, right? He's like, it's not. What matters is the longevity of what you're going to produce, right? What he meant is what matters is what you're going to produce over your life, right? Football is one small percentage of it. I've got friends of mine that played in the NFL. One small part of their life, right? And he was so right. He's like, why are you letting other things slack that are really important? And that sort of led into the whole conversation about time management. Where am I focusing at? Where am I focusing the details on? And he was absolutely right. He said, how much time do you spend watching film, breaking down film? If you spent half as much time studying for tests as you did breaking down film, where would you be? He was absolutely right. And I'll tell you guys this too. Sports, baseball and football, when I went to college and I tore my shoulders up, literally in a few small weeks, my entire life changed, the direction of my life changed because of injury. And I had to go through some really hard soul searching, some really dark times, and the proverbial, kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and figure out what am I going to do now. And And I'm telling you, everybody goes through dark times. Everybody goes through unfortunate circumstances, but it's not an opportunity. It should not be an opportunity for an excuse, right? Whether that's an excuse to be lazy, to start drinking, to start chasing some other addiction, whatever it is, that's just a BS excuse. And that is a reason for why we fail, because oftentimes we are so quick to blame others or look for some excuse versus just say, you know what, it's right here with the person in the mirror, and the only person that's going to fix this is me, so I might as well get on to it. John L says, now just keep thinking where the next $10 a day is. Yeah, no doubt, right? Yeah, man, Michael, it's true, right? And I hated I hated when people walk around, you got to give 100%, right? And what I realized in watching some people that were really exceptional athletes and really exceptional people in school, and they also, what was crazy was they spent just as much time as I did on sports. They spent just as much time in the classroom. But oh, by the way, they also found time to go do stuff for like nonprofits and other things, right? That I wasn't thinking that way. I was just too immature at the time, right? As I've gotten older, yeah, my focus has changed. But those people were able to really excel in a lot of really kind of core competencies in life. And I wasn't doing that. But it was because my focus was in the wrong area. Scott the Reefer Guy, part of the problem is kids are rushed through the grade school and told to get a job. They must attend, to get a job, they must attend college. What they need is to learn a trade to gain skills and common sense. And I think we're going to see that, right? Kyle, here's what's funny. Where we lived in Colorado was one of the more affluent zip codes in the entire United States. I mean, these schools, kids had, access to Mac laptops. They had access to iPads, you name it, right? I mean, no money, no expense spared. They didn't have a wood shop class. They didn't have a welding class. They didn't have any of that, right? Where I went to school, we learned wood shop, right? We learned welding, right? You learn those things. And those are good skills to have. Like, I'm a horrible welder, right? But when it comes to building a round pen, like, I can still get it done, right? I mean, it might not look quite as pretty as the next guy, but I can still get it done. Building stuff, yeah, I'm pretty handy with some of that kind of stuff. Now, mechanical, as you guys know, I'm horrible at that, right? Look, I can change the spark plug, but don't ask me to do much more. But that's sort of it. Like, I can change the spark plug, I can change the oil and some filters, and I can put gas in the vehicle. Outside of that, don't ask for my help. Like, don't phone a friend for help when it comes to that. I suspect we're going to see a big change when it comes to this next 20 years, because people still are going to need plumbers. They're still going to need electricians. They're still going to need welders. They're still going to need landscapers. And those jobs, I think, are, like you said, people are told they got to go to college and they got to do this and they got to do that. There is no guarantee, and that's why I think so many of these millennials are so pissed off that they should be making this much an hour, or I should be guaranteed a $100,000 a year job out of college. Why in the hell do they think that? Because their parents told them that this is what you should do. And I'm sort of guilty of that with Kyle, but man, I really try to say, look, man, you need to find out what your passion is. And I talk a lot about him because that kid has traveled a lot in his young life. That kid has been on more extravagant vacations than many, many adults. And I said, look, if that is the lifestyle that you've become accustomed to, you're gonna have to work your ass off for it. And what that means is you might end up having to make a decision to go find a job that's gonna pay you a lot more. If you wanna drive this kind of vehicle, live in this zip code, vacation here, and do this sort of things, you might have to give something up to have the money to do that, right? And so if you want to go be, if what you really want to do is go to Hawaii and be a surf instructor, I don't know what that pays, but I don't think it pays for you to drive a Maserati. I don't know that, I don't know any surf instructors. If you do, correct me. But you might have to give something up, right? You might be sharing an apartment with 4 other guys if that's the lifestyle that you want to lead, right? I don't know. Little Viking Coach says, Reefer Guy, kids learning is going to change to the online. Absolutely. When Little Viking, when Kyle was younger in middle school, right? What I was just talking about, they didn't even have books. They had no school books, none. Everything was online. Anyways, it says they'll learn what they're interested in. The model of education is broken. That's why the USA falls far behind in education. I've got some friends, Little Viking, that are teachers, and we sort of go round and round. I've got a couple that, I don't want this to go into a political discussion. But my sort of response is that we have to be doing better. And I don't believe, I just tend to sort of believe that the government does some things well. I just tend to believe that when the government sticks their nose in the stuff, they typically tend to screw it up far more often than they get it right. That's my opinion. Larry Stas, I apologize if I butchered that. There's already a shortage in the building trades, and as the years pass, it's only going to get worse. I agree with that. Harding chimes in. Not many surf instructors get $100 oil changes. I think you're probably right. Kyle and I were having a conversation when we were driving back to go see my dad here a couple weeks ago. And we were sort of talking about that, and he was talking about maybe going into the medical profession. And if that were the direction he would want to go, what would my recommendation be? And my recommendation would be, well, you sort of have at least, sort of the 2 most obvious routes, right? Obvious route number 1 is you work your ass off, you get good grades, you go to college, you work your ass off, you get good grades there, then you go into med school, you work your ass off, you get good grades there, and then if you are looking to become an anesthesiologist, that's going to take a lot of years, but you're probably in good financial shape, right? But you're going to come out of that with a whole bunch of debt. Option 2 is go into the military, serve our country. They'll pay for your med school as long as you're willing to work your ass off and get good grades. You'll get paid to do that, oh, by the way. So instead of having debt, you'll get paid to do that. You also get some of the best experience in the world, unfortunately, because some of those guys those surgeons in the military see some really horrific stuff. And if you choose to come out at some point in time, you'll have some great experience and you'll be able to go hopefully impact this world in a positive manner, leaving it a little bit better than you came into it. Yeah, no Maserati, isn't that the truth? Michael says he grew up in Oahu. That's a pretty island. Surf instructors qualify for food stamps. Yeah. AI, artificial intelligence, is the future for careers and investments. Little Viking Coach, I'm going to talk about this just real quickly. This video is already long, so what does it matter at this point? So, doctors, right? Doctors are legally required and have to sign documents legally stating that they are going to treat people with a level of respect and care, and they're legally bound to that. We don't have that yet for those that are creating the software for the artificial intelligence. And I actually have a video that I started working on back in probably January. It's probably 70% done. It's pretty hardcore in the AI space. More specifically, it talks about a lot of the robots, some of the comments that a lot of these robots have said as far as taking over the world, some of the things that they're doing. They're constantly learning. So we've created artificial intelligence where these robots learn every day at exponential rates. They can recite everything on the internet. Scary stuff. But the government's talking about needing to enforce laws to make sure that those writing code for AI doesn't cause the robots to take over the world. Probably a good thing to sort of get our hands around pretty early. I talk a lot about in business. If you're going to start a business, one of the first things you need to think about is your exit strategy. Few people think that way. We got to probably be thinking that way with artificial intelligence relative to the robots. Just my opinion. Too many robots, slow production, line speed. Huh, interesting. Don, I've got a friend of mine, had an opportunity, this man, his name is Scott as well. We played high school ball together and college ball together. Scott was really, really smart. Air Force Academy was just foaming at the mouth. They wanted him so bad, and he ended up going to the same small school that we went to. All ended up well. He still went to, he followed ROTC. He's a major now, or no, colonel now. Yeah, actually full-blown colonel now. So it all worked out, but I often asked him, you know, did he regret not going to the Air Force Academy? So, anyways, yeah. AI is it's kind of scary stuff. It really is. I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. Long video. We all suck at a lot of things, right? And with effort and some good old-fashioned willpower, we can fight through a whole host of things. Whether it's weight loss, being healthier, entering a new business, starting a new business. There's a whole host of stuff that we can do with some effort. And that's not only gonna make our lives better, it'll make our companies better. Whether you are an employee or an owner, right? You should spend that amount of time, you should just give a damn, right? If you're gonna spend the time to do it right. Now I sound like my old high school football coach. You know, all those adages that are running through my mind, right? Don't move dirt twice, right? All those kinds of things, you know, we should all wanna be better at. If you're new to the industry and you're getting into a company, ask questions, don't be afraid. And if you're at a company where you're kind of being scolded or slapped on the wrist, man, you know, it's up to you. It's your responsibility to be better. It's not always somebody else's responsibility. Oh, let's see. STEM vid coming. What's STEM, Greg? John, I appreciate that. I appreciate that comment. Thank you, man. I'm really going to try to get into creating some more of the edited videos. Those are quite honestly fun for me to create. You know, using some different cameras and some of the drones and stuff like that. It's just kind of more of a movie with a message, 7, 8, 10 minutes. I think those are a lot more fun to create. I think they're a lot more impactful. And I feel like there's maybe the message is there without maybe me shoving my opinions as strong as they are down other people's throat, but the message is there for people to go and try to find those answers on themselves. Yeah, you're right, unless you're filling a hole, you bet. Oh, gotcha, sorry. I didn't know what acronym you guys were talking about. Randy Spears, death to the robot. Why must we keep trying to reinvent the wheel? Well, so this will probably be a good one just to kind of wrap up on. You look at the auto industry, right? So years back, what was it, late 80s, early 90s, something like that, when they sort of killed the production line, killed the jobs on the production line, and they retrofitted it with robots. So a lot of people lost those jobs, and the world is crashing, the world's coming to an end. In reality, a lot of those individuals that were good at saving the company money were just reassigned to do other things, right? The people that were sort of, I'm not gonna say worthless, but didn't add value, the company didn't really have a need for them. And that's gonna be the same case no matter what job it is. But that company, as a result, is more efficient. They can build more cars that are probably built as good, if not better, far more efficiently, meaning the company has more profit. Oh, by the way, those individuals that lost those jobs, but that became reassigned, got more training, right? Expanded their career, broadened their background, their experiences, had an opportunity to learn something new and be valuable. I kid Howard all the time. I mean, he and I have talked about this for a long time. I've talked about this in other videos. He was in the office, and we needed some software to be turned up. And I'd ask some other people to do it. They didn't do it. And so I was so aggravated. And Howard talked to me one night. He said, "Look, I think I can do that." And I said, "All right, fine. If you think you can do it, go crazy. Knock yourself out. I think I gave him like a week or 2 weeks to get it turned up and fully operational." And I told him, I said, "Look, I want you to do this quietly because I'm going to get a lot of pushback, because the perception is that truck drivers are dumb, right?" So he and I kid all the time about the dumb truck driver that happens to get shit done, right? Howard has a lot of great abilities. And one of the things that I admire most about him is his tenacity to figure it out. He might not know the first thing about whatever it may be. I don't know, starting a freight brokerage. But if I say, "Hey, Howard, I need you to go figure this out," Howard's going to go away. He's going to be quiet. And 2 or 3 weeks later, he's going to come back. And he's going to have a whole boatload of data and answers. And it's going to be incredibly impressive. All he did was refuse to quit, refuse to stop at a wall or a hurdle. Instead, he just went and got a bigger sledgehammer and kicked down the wall and figured it out. Every one of us have that same opportunity. And if you are in an industry or you are a driver, you're going to have that same label right there on your chest that says, "I'm a dumb truck driver." And it's your responsibility to prove everybody wrong. Greg Igman, you're still in here, I assume. I'll use Greg. Greg has an MBA from the University of Denver, which is one of the, which is incredibly highly touted university to get an MBA from, business degree. I think it's business. It's up to each one of us to break the molds, right? It really is. When I have to, yeah, I can still throw on a shirt and tie and some cufflinks, not have a chew in my mouth, and I can still walk into a boardroom, and I can still talk to attorneys, and I can still get things done. I just prefer to wear a hat. I prefer to have a chew in. I prefer to break a lot of the molds that people say you shouldn't do. And I'm okay with that. But it's up to us to take that responsibility to just go and break the mold and do things better. And it doesn't matter what you look like, doesn't matter how much you weigh. A whole lot of things don't matter when it comes to just getting things done. If those things, how much you weigh or whatever, lack of education, are a hurdle, we can change those things, right? But we've got to put the work and the effort into it. That's what I got. Crazy long video, my bad. It's almost 3 o'clock Pacific. I've got but this one's long enough for a couple of days. You guys are making miles. Stay safe.